Shuhei Yoshida, who essentially left the PlayStation brand after 31-ish years, he was heavily involved in a lot of what made PlayStation successful. He was kind of an OG before the games as a service push and all this different stuff. Well, he recently left PlayStation. You know, he was leaving in January of 2025, which is pretty much now. I mean, I think he left about 5 days ago. That was when the position ended. He had some comments about Bloodborne. He had some comments about potentially why we haven't seen Bloodborne again, why we haven't seen a remaster, a remake, a sequel, etc. Now, I do want to clarify one thing with my stance as someone who loves this series. Again, I'm not a programmer or anything like that. I've talked about it before. I really love Bloodborne. I don't think it needs a remake. I think a remaster could very easily iron out the issues the original had. And I do think that a sequel, while I'm open to it, and it's a crazy idea, there's lots of stuff you can do with the dream worlds, things like that, H.P. Lovecraft inspired things. I don't necessarily need a sequel. I think it would be really fun. I just think really at this point, it would be nice to see a remaster. And he sat down and kind of answered this question of perhaps why we haven't seen it. And I thought it was very interesting because in his opinion, it seems to boil down to Miyazaki loving Bloodborne so much that it hasn't happened. You might say, well, that's weird. Why would Miyazaki, you know, one of the creative minds behind From Software's greatest successes, or at the head of some of their greatest successes, why would he not want to go back to something because he loves it? That doesn't make sense. Well, we're going to take a look at it today for a couple of minutes, and I do want to hear your thoughts on it in the comments down below. Just, would you want to see Bloodborne again? Like, do you think it should be left alone? Do you trust PlayStation right now to tackle it? Do you think that a remaster, remake, or sequel would be good? You know, from Software, personally, I think they did such an amazing job with Elden Ring that I don't think they've lost their touch at all. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts down below. So I guess this is kind of where it becomes difficult, because if you look at something like Demon's Souls and you look at the remake of it, I personally like it a lot. That said, it does change some of the art direction of the original. Like, some of the aesthetics are a little different. And I've seen a lot of people who really didn't connect with that side of it too. So I think when you are remaking or remastering something, if you don't have the original people and the exact same art style or art direction, there's going to be people who don't vibe with it. And I understand that because it's not the same exactly as what the original was. And a lot of people want a one-to-one translation of it, which does make sense. There's other things I think it works where that's not the case. But when it comes to this, Shuhei Yoshida gave out his personal theory on why this might not have happened yet, saying that it's just his theory, it's not a fact. He said, people wonder why we haven't really done anything in regards to Bloodborne. My theory is that because I remember Miyazaki-san really loved Bloodborne, what he created, I think he is interested, but he is so successful and he is so busy, so he cannot do it himself. But he doesn't want anyone else to touch it. So that's my theory, and the PlayStation team respects his wish. So that's my guess. I'm not revealing any secret information, which I think is interesting that it was essentially his speculation. I will include the interview and some of the other stuff in the description down below. I always try and do a sources section when we use direct quotes, things like that. But it's interesting to me to see this because I know some people are going to look at that and they're going to say, well, if he loves it so much, why doesn't he just take the time to go back to it? You know, if he loves it so much, why doesn't he do anything with it? And while I do want to see more with it, it's kind of a difficult position to be in, I'm sure, because if you look at something like Elden Ring, one of the reasons Elden Ring was so successful is because it came to everything. Now, I know that there are places where console exclusivity has benefited games, or even PC exclusivity has benefited games. If you target games at a specific machine, you can take advantage of that machine's hardware, maybe gimmicks around the machine, different things like that, that you might not necessarily be able to take advantage of if you don't do that, right? If you're a multi-platform hit. Now, that said, video games have gotten so expensive over the years to make, especially games on a scale like Elden Ring, that it seems to me like a lot of developers and a lot of publishers have actually tried to not be a second-party exclusive studio. And what I mean by that is you have your first-party exclusive studios, they're owned directly by whatever that platform is. Nintendo, for example, has a bunch, and they will make things exclusive to the Switch, for example. Or maybe PlayStation has some of these studios, they'll make things exclusive to PlayStation. But then, of course, as well, you also have these second-party studios where they will sign these deals like they are not directly under that company, but they have such a good working relationship with them that it'll be a contract like, hey, put Final Fantasy VII Remake on our platform exclusive for 1 or 2 or X amount of years, and we will pay for this much of the development, or we will give you this many $1 million. And that actually does help fund these games. In a lot of cases, there are some games that would not get made or made the way they are without that funding. But you even look at something like Final Fantasy, and recently Square was talking about this and pretty much said, hey, look, you know, we need to focus as well on other platforms. We're kind of moving away from platform exclusivity. And while dodging some of the questions a little bit and not going super into detail, the understanding is essentially because games are so expensive to make, especially on a wide scale, you know, open world or in-depth worlds or things like that, that while you can be successful being platform exclusive, as a second-party studio or as someone not a first-party studio, it's going to be harder. You're in a weird position where you now have an exclusive deal with a company to stay within their ecosystem of platforms, but that cuts out a huge swath of other players that you could potentially be making money off of. And so then it's like, does that multi-million-dollar deal, does it outweigh the amount of money that you're potentially giving up from the rest of the player base? So you're looking at something like Bloodborne. It is exclusive to PlayStation, and as far as I am aware, PlayStation owns part of that IP. It's not something where it's like From Software made it, From Software owns the IP, and they just licensed it to PlayStation for this many years. It's been stated before by Miyazaki in interviews that From Software doesn't exclusively own that IP. So you now have a brand that essentially belongs in a lot of ways to PlayStation, but the studio that made it doesn't belong to PlayStation. They have a stock in it, they have holdings in it, but it doesn't belong to them. So now you have a bit of a conflict of interest where we own this brand, we want you to do something with the brand, you're too busy to do something with the brand because in order to be very successful with your studio, you want to branch out. We're still holding this brand, what should we do with it? Well, if we hand it to someone else, even though there are other people that I think could handle it, like Bluepoint, for example, I do think they could probably handle it. If we hand this to them, there's going to be a lot of people who say it's not the same, you know, Miyazaki didn't touch it, whatever. Then in this case, if Yoshida's right, you might have Miyazaki who's frustrated saying, hey, now wait a minute, that was my baby. I get that you own it, and that's fine, but it was my blood, sweat, and tears that made that game with this studio and with all of these developers and stuff. Like, we made that game happen. You didn't. You just funded part of it. So now you have a catch-22 where it's like you don't want to piss him off. You know, obviously, he's a pretty jovial, kind person from all accounts, but you also don't want to, like, you don't want to alienate him, but you also don't want to leave this brand to stagnate forever to the point where no one cares. That's where I think it kind of becomes interesting and a bit frustrating if Yoshida is right, because also, from a financial standpoint, I wonder a little bit how much money they have lost out on. I mean, you already have people porting this unofficially to PC, getting it running on emulators. You have people remastering the game themselves on PC. Now, I understand that the PC player base is not the entirety of video games. You know, there are other platforms and stuff like that. But it's like, how many of those people waited around for years and then they basically put the Thanos gauntlet on, said, fine, I'll do it myself, and now they don't need your remaster anymore, or they don't need your remake anymore. I do kind of wonder about that. Like, have any of those projects replaced the need on PC with that player base for you to profit off of them? That's the other risk you run when you leave things to stagnate forever, is you run the risk that somebody comes in, does it themselves as a hobbyist, and that they get it running as good or better than you can, and they did it for free. And that's kind of the situation I think that Bloodborne is in a little bit. Now, does that mean that, you know, the PlayStation player base wouldn't buy it? No, absolutely not. And does that mean that there aren't plenty of people on PC who would buy it? Absolutely not. But I'm just saying that I think with this, a lot of people, they really did do it themselves already because they felt Sony and From and all these people wouldn't do it. And I think that that's kind of too bad. You know, I've talked about this before. Sony seems to care enough about Bloodborne that they'll do things like reach out to the creator of Bloodborne card and basically send them not a cease and desist, but like a hey, you shouldn't be doing this type message, to the point where that had to be reworked and the Bloodborne IP had to be stripped from this fan game. Something I find very stupid. Like, you should not have to do that at all. I believe it became Nightmare Card. So that's ridiculous already to me. Like, you're reaching out, you're interfering with fan games, doing stuff like that people aren't making any money off of. And then on top of that, you still care enough to reference it in like a trailer or in Astrobot or things like that, but you're not really making anything. And I think that this is unfortunately the position a lot of PlayStation IPs have found themselves in, from things like Jak and Daxter to Sly Cooper. You have all of these different things, Resistance, Killzone, etc., that just kind of sit by the wayside, and fans of it still exist, but nothing's really done with it, so they just kind of start moving on. Now, I think because From Software is so big, PlayStation knows that you would be able to remake this game 10 years from now and people would still buy it, so they're probably not worried about that. But I do think that that approach with a lot of their other console exclusive or platform exclusive IP has actually kind of killed off that IP, possibly even permanently. But anyway, let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe. I appreciate you very, very much. Big fan of Bloodborne. I do hope we get to see more out of it in some aspect or way in the future. If you want to support this channel, you can use Fortnite code DJAY123, or you can use that same code, which will get you 10% off on our store, cosmobunny.shop. We make coasters, keychains, trays, and more out of recycled paper from comics, manga, magazines, and more that have been damaged. They can't be sold in stores because they're damaged. They basically sit on clearance shelves, and then they end up in trash bins and landfills a lot of the time. So what we do is we take those off of store hands, make transformative art out of it for your home, and we recycle the rest. So we hope you have a fantastic day, and as always, everyone, stay Shuhei.